Gary DePaul with Unlabeled Leadership. Welcome to episode 88, Richard Lowe Practices with Competence. A shout out to listeners in Yogyakarta, Indonesia, Geneva, Switzerland, Nuevo Leon, Mexico, and in Sri Lanka. With that, let's get started. Richard Lowe has written and published 63 books on a variety of subjects. He's ghostwritten 43 books, which just shows his passion to help businesses and individuals write books that showcase their expertise, build their credibility, and tell their story. Before his writing career, he was a director of computer operations for Trader Joe's. Before that, he was a VP of consulting for 2 computer firms. And you're going to hear a story about one of those firms. In addition to ghostwriting and writing all those books, Richard has hosted some podcasts. He has a series out called Conversations with Influencers and another one on Author Talk with Richard Lowe. Part 1, Asking Questions to Clarify. As a performance consultant, I found one of the areas that managers could really do a better job at is setting expectations and clarifying what it is that employees need to be doing. When employees struggle with the task or seem to be doing it less proficiently than the manager would like, the manager needs to step in and support the employees. Richard shares a story that really touches on all of this. It has a lot to do with leadership and how to become more effective at management through leading. Here's Richard to share a story.
Well, way back when I was in high school in 1978, my dad said, "You're getting a job." I said, "Okay, fine," after a little bit of arguing back and forth. So I got a job at a liquor store, the only liquor store in Lake Arrowhead, California, and it's not there anymore. I started and I found out quickly that my boss was a strong disciplinarian. And after some conversations with some of the people who worked there, I realized that he was actually a World War II U-boat commander on the German side.
Amazing.
Which explained why he was such a strong disciplinarian. I worked there for a while and got all the training and learned how to stock the shelves and all that kind of stuff. All this was new to me. It was kind of fun. I learned the best I could and asked questions and so forth. And then I noticed an odd thing. People who worked there were getting fired. They weren't leaving on their own. They were getting fired and I wasn't. I was wondering why. Why am I still here after a year when 15 people fired? This store only hired 3 people at a time. So it's big turnover. So then I had a little conversation with him and he said, "Well, it's very simple. I'm just looking for competence. That's all I'm looking for. Be competent." And I thought, well, that must mean I'm competent. And he said, "Yes, you're doing the job. You make mistakes and I don't like those mistakes, but that's fine. But just be competent. That's all I ask. Do your job and do it well as you can. And if you don't know how to do it, ask and get training or whatever and move forward." My reaction was, wow, that's pretty simple. It's a very simple tenet to follow is just be competent. Now, what does that mean? It affected me a lot in life after that. When I went to college, I just was competent in college because that's how you make good grades, just be competent. And when I got my first job, which they hired me out of college, I was a teacher who started a startup. He hired me as a programmer. And then within a year, I was a VP of that company. Again, just being competent. Then I went to another company, was a VP, and then finally wound up at Trader Joe's as a director of technical services and computer operation. Just continued being as competent as I could, which means do my job well as I can. And in my case, I was managing people also. So manage those people good, make sure they're also doing well and that they're competent as they can. So give them training and coaching and mentoring. It also means don't be goofing around and don't be on your cell phone or smartphone while you're supposed to be working. And it has so many implications. And I was working away at Trader Joe's, and then I ran into a new boss. My old boss got fired for interesting reasons. And then I suddenly was working directly for the CEO, which was a big shock. His name was John Shields, and he to be the CEO of Macy's. And he was coming to Trader Joe's to specifically build it up to $1 billion a year company. He was my boss for maybe 6 months. And during that time, I learned so much. And again, it was just ask questions, be competent, try not to be afraid of him because he was a big name.
Yeah.
In my mind, it was kind of like working for Warren Buffett or, Bill Gates, that kind of name to me in my thinking. I managed to prosper at the company for 20 years and made a good salary and stuff. It carries over through all parts of life, even in my hobbies, even my relationships, everything. Basically, be as good as I can be. And not just me, but make sure that spreads around to the people around me, to the society that I'm in, to my church, to everything else. be competent.
There was a couple of things that you said in there. One of them is to ask questions, to gather information, to get feedback, so you can gauge your level of competence.
Yes, it's very important to be aware, to keep the communication lines open and be aware of where you're at, because there's sometimes when you're not the right person to judge your own competence.
Yeah.
You just got into a new area. You may not know something. Like I've never smoked or drank, and here I was in a liquor store stocking shelves with cigarettes and alcohol and selling it. And I didn't know what it was. So I had to ask the boss, what is this? And he explained how to mix various things. I was too young to mix the things. I was only 17, but I could sell them closed. And I asked questions and he taught me, and he was fine with that. He didn't mind the questions. And that's something that I had to overcome from earlier in life. My parents and stuff minded the questions. So I actually had to overcome a barrier there. And I had to do that all the time. Is the CEO, is John Shields going to be mad if I ask him this question? Like the time I had to go in there and ask him could I spend $100,000 for something? He says, you know what you're doing, just go do it. I don't pay people who aren't competent. That was a big thing for me.
The other thing that you said that I thought was notable is that you used the word discipline. If you don't have discipline in what you're doing, then when things are not going well, it's easy to let that overwhelm you. But if you have the discipline, if you do things that when you're not feeling like doing them, it does help. And there seems to be something very important around that.
Well, yeah, let me give you an example more closer to current time is that I'm a ghostwriter and I write between 3 and 6 books at a time. A thing about my discipline is that I have to stay up to date, because if I fall behind, first of all, I'm paid on milestones, so I don't get paid. That's kind of important. And I've set it up that way intentionally because that keeps my eye on the ball. And second, I have to finish it with quality. So I have to finish it on time and with quality to keep going. Because if any one of those falls behind, I'm dead in the water. It's a discipline. At the end of every week, I have some goals. At the beginning of the week, I set the goals. And by the end of the week, I've met those goals. And they further me towards meeting my monthly goal, which is where my milestones are set as monthly. And I make sure I deliver it to the customers and they know it. And it's a strong discipline. By having that discipline, I got time to goof around. You'd think writing 6 books, you wouldn't have time to goof around, but I got time to goof around because I'm up to date. I have found, this is another little nugget, is that the backlog is what kills you. Man, you get a backlog, you got things going back there, lower priority things, whatever you want to call it. Those are the things that rear their ugly head. You wind up getting wiped out when you didn't even expect it. It's like, oh my God, where did that come from? Well, it was something you didn't finish.
And then you find yourself trying to do all the catch up, and that interferes with your weekly, monthly goals.
Yeah, you're in react mode and your weekly and monthly goals get set aside. Then you're getting more and more and more behind. Once you're behind, it's really hard to catch up. And that's the discipline. You just got to keep up to date, keep the quality up, and keep the time up, keep the communication up. Let people know where you're at. Okay, I'm a little behind this week, Mr. Client, but let's do another interview and let's get caught up.
Part 2, the multi-million-dollar crash. In my book, 9 Practices of 21st Century Leadership, I have a practice called Finding Key Behaviors Like Social Psychologists. In it, I talk about finding key behaviors. There's a book called Influencer, written by the authors of the Crucial Conversations book, where they talk about finding vital behaviors. Charles Duhigg, who's famous for his Habits book, came out with something similar, and he calls those keystone habits. I call them key behaviors. These are behaviors involved in certain moments that matter or inflection points, and they can trigger between accomplishing something successfully or not. In this story you're about to hear, Richard describes something that happens at his company, and he makes a decision. I believe this is one of those key behavior moments. His actions led to a chain of reactions and a chain of actions that enabled his company to recover. Again, here's Richard.
This is very interesting. I'll try not to get technical on it. We'd had at a company where I worked, we had a major computer crash. We were down hard. And down means that basically it was costing millions of dollars every single day. And it was an exponential curve. So the longer we were down, the more it cost. It was my responsibility to get the computer up. What I quickly found, first of all, it was 2 a.m. when the computer crashed. It always does, right?
Yes.
And it was some silly error. It wasn't even an error. It was something somebody did that should have been normal, but there was a bug in the code in the disk drive and it spread through the whole system and then so forth. So I'm sitting there going, okay, we're down. It's 2 a.m. Nobody's awake. What do I do? So I had to wake everybody up. They were all grumpy and stuff, but they came in. And I had to call my database person who was in a plane getting ready to jump out in a parachute in the Mojave Desert later in the day. So he was unavailable. And then I had to call my boss. He was like, worry about it in the morning. It's like, we can't do that, boss, because this means that deliveries will be late and so forth. He said, well, handle it. I just had to take control of everything, which meant handling all the warehouses. So I had to call all the warehouses. I had to call a warehouse person, and she and I got together and started coordinating stuff and making sure things were going right. We had to call all kinds of people and make things happen. And she handled something, and I had to call a development person, and they handled trying to fix it. And by the time morning came, I had like 40 people working for me that I didn't manage. I didn't manage any of these people except for my team, which was only 8 people. We were just busy making it happen. The boss comes in and was like, okay, we're down. Well, why haven't you failed over to DR? Because it's down too. DR is disaster recovery. Oh, okay. Well, what about tapes? Tapes are dead. So what are we going to do? We don't know yet. I mean, it was bad. We finally got it all recovered. It took 72 hours. It was the worst crash we ever had. Recovering from that took months because there were multiple systems. We had probably 40 or 50 systems all talking to each other, and the main one was down, but those other systems had to keep going. So you can imagine they're all talking to each other, but the main one's not listening. What happens to all those things that it's not listening to? We had to catch it up by hand. We're talking probably 100 million transactions that had to be caught up and reconciled, and errors found, and all kinds of things. It was a nightmare. Somebody had to do it. I kind of took control as the nerve center, so to speak. After that, it became kind of gentle management because people just did what they're supposed to do, and it got handled. The development person did what they're supposed to do. But it was a nightmare, probably my worst nightmare. And I literally did not sleep for 70 hours.
One of the things about the story is very admirable is how you had the contact, for example, the warehouses, and get everyone involved because of this emergency. And it's fantastic that everyone started jumping in. I can imagine if you did not have that type of a reaction, if people were not as urgent about what they were doing, that 72 hours could easily change into 144 hours to a week.
Well, yeah. And one of the reasons why it was 72 hours was the guy who I hired, who was in charge of the backups, he was on vacation in Sonata, and couldn't get hold of him. There was a flaw in our disaster procedure. He had the names and phone numbers of the people who had the disaster tapes. So we had to get hold of him. And it took us almost 24 hours to get hold of him. We finally got hold of him. They're like in my desk right there. And he gave me the numbers. And we'd searched his desk. We didn't have a clue. It was all chicken scratch to us. Of course, it was the weekend. It always is. And they were closed. So we had to hunt down the guy, and he jumped them right in. And then, of course, we said, bring in the tapes. And the tapes that he brought in were, of course, bad. Murphy was like having lunch with us. So we had to send him back to get more tapes. Fortunately, Oracle is a database, and you can roll it forward. So we were fortunately able to get an older backup and roll it forward. And we managed to recover everything but an hour. We were just lucky. That was the cream on the crop. But everybody did jump right into it and started helping and things. It was interesting that as soon as I explained what happened, they're like, oh, wow, let's get this going. Because nobody wanted to be the person who didn't help. That was pretty obvious. Nobody wanted to be the one who says, it's not a problem. Because they were the ones who were going to get blamed and nailed,
Part 3, Building a Team. In my book, What the Heck is Leadership and Why Should I Care?, I make a strong distinction between what management is and what leadership is. What you're about to hear is advice for people in management for what they can do to build strong, high-performing teams. Here's Richard to explain.
The important thing about leadership is that it's not getting your hands dirty. It's not being a coder. It's not being a manager. It's not being a supervisor. It's being a leader. And being a leader means making people motivated to meet the goals of the organization. It's not your goals. It's not their goals. It's the goals of the organization. Also working with them to fit their goals and your goals and everything around the goals of the organization. Your job is to do that. And one of the things you do to do that, of course, is to mentor them, which basically means working with them so that they learn from, or having somebody work with them so that they learn from that other person who's more experienced. Or you coach them, which means you give them advice and things over their shoulder, do this way and so forth. Or you send them to training, or all of the above, more like. And you do all of that over and over and over again. It's ongoing. It doesn't just stop. You don't just send people to training. Okay, fine, they're trained now. The technology changes too fast, and things change way too fast for you to be able to let people sit down there. You have to take into account their goals and make sure that they remain aligned with the organization, but that they're also achieving their own goals. So what are their career goals? What are their life goals? So on. What are their personal goals? You work around that. You build a team that you lead. By leading, you basically make an environment that's safe for them, that's good for them to work in, that they feel comfortable with, that they know that they can innovate, and they know that they're protected to a certain extent, and that they can be competent and ask questions and make mistakes. Mistakes are very important. You have to let people make mistakes and learn from mistakes. That's the kind of environment you want. You want a nice fostering environment that makes people grow and want to give and want to be part of it. Otherwise, they're just a bunch of employees doing stuff. That works too, but that works until you get into a situation that's not normal. And believe me, this world after the pandemic, you can no longer call it normal. And so you better be flexible. You need to be building leading teams and making people part of the team and so forth, or your company's probably not going to make it.
It sounds like there's two levels of thinking. One is managing the work, making sure it all gets done. But at another level, and this is something that David Marquet talks about in Turn the Ship Around, is that you want to change the environment for your team so that they can be at their best. And it sounds like that's something that should be very consciously orchestrated and designed. As you said, that would make that environment safe and people feel protected and supported. That makes all the difference in productivity and performance.
Of course. And now, on the other hand, you do not put up with slackers, and you don't put up with people who aren't performing and who aren't competent, because that will bring down the whole team. You have to have discipline as well. You can make an environment that's safe for them, not so safe that they could sit there and read magazines all day.
Yeah, exactly.
They have to do their job, and they have to do it well. If they don't, you take corrective action, which usually starts with a discussion with them. What's going on? And then coming up with a solution to that. Oh, you don't know how to do that. Well, let's get you some training or mentoring or coaching or whatever is appropriate. Then they still are messing up. Okay, then you need to ask them a little more questions. Why is this not working? Wrong training, more coaching, more mentoring. But you might come down to, this person just isn't working. He doesn't want to do the job. He's not motivated to do the job. His intentions are different than the organization's. He's got something going on outside of the work that's interfering. I mean, I had a guy whose kid was having a severe disease and he didn't want to tell me. And his performance really dropped. I brought down the sledgehammer because I didn't know. And he finally broke down and cried and told me the whole story. I was like, okay, we'll deal with that. Gave him a little slack, because sometimes you do need to give people slack. He came back and became very competent again after that. The same thing happened to me when my wife passed away at work, and my productivity dropped a bit. And the boss understood and said, we understand. And, for the next few months, you're going to be out of it.
It's a crucial lesson for people in organizations where you have to give up this idea that you are capable, or people are capable of compartmentalizing what happens at work from what happens outside of work, because one affects the other. And you have real work-life balance issues and not in the sense of time, that's like the old thinking of work-life balance, but in the sense of something affecting one environment versus the other. The loss of a wife, having a disease, if you keep that stuff to yourself and people at work don't know it, they make assumptions that your competence is lacking rather than just being able to support you and help you because you are a competent person. It's something else that's going on, and companies really need to step in to support employees. And afterwards, I'm sure I'm going to speculate that after time with the loss of your wife, you had an appreciation for your boss for giving you that support during the time that you needed it.
Of course. Now, there's one more point that I think is important, is schedules and things. One thing that I found, and it ties right into competence, is you have to manage your manager in addition to managing your manager managing you. I read a book called The 59-Second Employee, How to Outwit the 60-Second Manager, or The 1-Minute Manager, if you remember that book.
Yeah.
It's a fad long time ago. And the idea is you have to manage in all directions. So when your manager gives you schedules that you can't meet, which is quite common, they're expecting you to work overtime to meet them. You can't allow that, because that'll become normal. You have to say, boss, we can't do this with the resources we have. You either need to hire more people or you need to fix the schedule so that we can meet it. And they'll hem and haw and scream at you, and they're not good bosses. They'll even threaten you. But stand firm, man. Because what I found is the schedule, you want to work a 40-hour work week, maybe split into 50 hours at the most. And the boss makes a schedule that's, okay, we're going to put this in. We're going to put it in 3 months. Boss, it's a 6-month project. You can all work overtime, weekends and stuff. He's going to start to depend on it. And then you find your work-life balance, which is what started me on this, is gone, because he's depending on you schedule after schedule after schedule, because you've made it okay for him to do it. It's not his fault. You just made it okay. You said, fine, I'll do that. Stop it. Manage your manager.
My thanks to Richard Lowe. If you'd like to learn more about Richard, go to the show notes. If you have a question or comment, go to unlabelleadership.com, click the message icon, and you can leave a voicemail message for up to 1 minute. I'd like to thank those who contribute to the show. Your contributions makes a real difference because this is an all-volunteer service. Mostly, I'd like to thank you for listening. Until next time, lead on.